Hello there! So, one of the most appealing things about Osu is its insurmountable skill ceiling. Players begin without any knowledge or abilities, believing that mouse only is the most practical way to play on easy and normal difficulties. Then, they learn that maybe using two hands is more effective and progress onto hard difficulties. Somewhere along the way comes their understanding of the game's skill measurement system, aka performance points, and they start playing insane and extra difficulties with that ever-increasing number in mind. Improvement continues infinitely from there, with the limits of the past being transcended by players all the time. Mapping functions the same way. There's neither a ceiling for how interesting a map can be, nor a limit on how well a map can represent music. Mappers can continue to improve their knowledge and abilities to no end, but unlike gameplay, that's not easy to gauge. Despite what issues the performance point system may have, it can still provide an okay image of how skilled a player is. Mapping, however, doesn't have a clear way to mark improvement. Mappers can only rely on feedback from others to determine if they're on the right track, and even then, responses vary from person to person. There's only one goal a mapper can aim to achieve, which indicates any type of legitimate improvement: ranked status. Mappers work tirelessly to reach this point, but afterwards, there's nothing special to achieve. The journey of improving one's mapping ability from this point on becomes vague. A mapper could rank more maps, but that's only reapplying their existing knowledge. Feedback also wanes in usefulness for various reasons. And worst of all, complacency kicks in. It feels unnecessary to change something which fulfills its main purpose. So how exactly can a mapper improve beyond this minimum standard, this wall, this artificial skill ceiling? And what's really the point in doing so? By the end of 2014, I was on my way to ranking my third map, Apocalyptica's Hall of the Mountain King. The uphill battle to reach this point was definitely tedious. My first map fell into the graveyard after countless mods and outsider opinions. My next map got ranked after even more mods, and my map after that went through a similarly long struggle to reach rank status. In between those were some more practice maps which I never got to promote for one reason or another, and throughout this whole time period, I felt a constant sense of improvement. In the end, progression in mapping was enjoyable, just like progression in normal Osu gameplay. With Hall of the Mountain King, things started to change though. I was convinced I had a decent grasp on what I was doing as a mapper, based on the map's reception and my own steady development. Modders told me the map had virtually no problems on multiple occasions. I had no trouble finding beatmap nominators either, and once it was ranked, comments from both players and mappers showered me in praise. All my hard work was beginning to pay off, so I continued capitalizing on it the best I could. For months more, I mapped in the same minimally acceptable way with next to no opposition from mappers, until this map was ranked. At the time, Condo Reduction was one of the hardest maps I had ever created, and also one which I was most proud of. When asking for mods, a mapper who I respected even complimented it, which made me feel even more confident in my creation. However, the ranking criteria has essentially no mention of how movement should be handled, so my map was a mess of imprecise movement concepts. At one moment, I would use conventional sharp angles and circular flow, like this clockwise pattern. But then, while representing essentially the same sounds in the music, I would also use movement which felt completely different. Like 1 through 4 requires clockwise rotation with a wider than usual angle, then 4's body indicates counterclockwise movement, and finally the stream of 5 through 8 goes clockwise immediately after. Switching direction of rotation often in a short period of time is usually a pain to adapt to, and is worsened by how players wouldn't actually play it as intended. More than likely, players would instead move in a line between 3, 4, and 5, hoping that their hand control is precise enough to accurately begin clicking on a blue tick and move through the rest of the stream's conventionally uncomfortable path. Overall, the mix of unnatural ways all streams are laid out are more of a problem than any awkward jumps throughout the map because I overlooked how players utilize slider leniency. Something along these lines was what Charles445, one of Osu's most well-respected mapping figures, found concerning in my map. And chances are, he doesn't even remember it. I was never actually told any of this directly. I only pieced it together from a casual conversation he had about the map with other mappers. I doubt he looked at the map for more than 5 minutes, but still, even if they were indirect, his concerns were some of the most beneficial feedback I'd received since Hall of the Mountain King. A mapper can never please everyone, that's something I already knew, and I received complaints from a few players about my maps not flowing well, which I overlooked because so many others supported my maps. However, when coming from someone who I actually looked up to, a seemingly insignificant criticism stuck with me, to the point of influencing everything about how I design maps from then onwards. Always in the back of my mind, I had thoughts about how poorly I organized movement on my older maps. I wanted to improve so as to not disappoint those whose opinions I respected, and by recognizing my mistakes, I now knew how. Mapping became fun again because I was improving. Due to Charles's honest thoughts, I enjoyed the act of mapping more than any amount of praise from the masses could ever compare to. So, why did it take so long for someone to tell me my maps could be better, even if they were still rankable? At the time, the best result I could find was that people are sensitive, especially when it comes to their hard work. When directly talking to someone about their map, it's common to sugarcoat issues so as to not be overly destructive. And when the only main goal of mapping is to reach rank, that also means excluding any suggestions that aren't 100% necessary. With indirect opinions like this though, there was no holding back. I received honest criticism which was in no way fogged by the bounds of social politeness. And as it turns out, I needed more. My way of mapping changed significantly after this, around early to mid 2015, but I only led myself to stagnation once again. My maps went from interesting and unorganized to uninteresting and organized, which was perfect for ranking standards but hadn't pushed me far enough up the improvement ladder. Mapping was becoming less fun, while I also started seeing people comment on how similarly all my maps were designed, and so I tried to counter that criticism by experimenting with absurd circle sizes. I made loads of expert difficulties ranging from the largest circle size possible to the smallest, which did stop a bit of the criticism. This idea was culminated in my largest map set ever, Apocalyptica's Reign of Fear. When you see a set of 6 difficulties, you assume they're a linear spread covering easy up through expert, but that wasn't the case here. Maps with over 5 minutes of total playtime don't actually need a spread, they can be ranked with only 1 difficulty. That's boring though. I wanted to make a map set that stood out and caused a reaction like, wow, that's a lot of work. Good job, Mr. Mapper. Which, yeah, that's exactly what I got. Reign of Fear has been my most appreciated map set by far. Mappers, like players, thought it was something amazing. For the most part. Standing out from the crowd was one mapper who I never spoke to directly about Reign of Fear. Once again, Charles445. In another casual conversation with other mappers, he let his legitimate opinion be known. He stated that this map set was worthless. Each difficulty was essentially the same thing, only with variable circle sizes to give the illusion of actual differentiation. All my hard work was summed up as a waste of time. I tried to convince myself otherwise. Each difficulty was something slightly different, like the second one focused on overlaps and the last one on stamina. Charles just couldn't recognize it and I was only fooling myself. I wanted to have not spent so much time in vain, and eventually I came to accept what I'd done. Was it worthless though? I don't think so. That also meant Charles taught me to never make that mistake again. With his once more indirect complaints, my way of mapping underwent another steady yet apparent change. Instead of relying on a superficial gimmick to make my maps acceptable, I learned the value of making my concepts clearer. No more would mappers not see the slight differences between each of my maps. The unique elements of my new maps were now bold, which led to a strengthening of their concepts and a therefore more interesting gameplay experience. This was what I needed to push over the edge. The harsh truth which surpassed the basic goal of mapping, coming from someone whose opinions held the highest value to anyone in the mapping realm. It wasn't nice per se, but it was ultimately what I needed to continue enjoying mapping. Why didn't I ask for more though? Like from Charles specifically. I told myself it was because he might undersell his opinions if he were to directly speak to me, but I don't actually know if that would be true. For all I know, Charles would be just as honest up front, causing me to improve significantly more. The problem was that I was scared. I didn't want to ask for his honest opinions because they hurt, despite being beneficial in the long term. That's part of why mappers settle at the minimum quality standard. Improving makes mapping fun, but it can be a painful process at times. Stagnation, on the other hand, isn't fun, but it's satisfying to receive praise, so mappers believe that moving on might not be worth it. At the time, that was my thought process. Only indirect complaints would reach me because I was too scared to leave my comfort zone and improve as a mapper. Maybe at some point after this, I would have garnered the courage and asked Charles for feedback directly, but it quickly became too late. Starting around 2016, Charles ended up straying further and further from the game, leading to his definitive withdrawal from the mapping scene altogether. At the very least though, thanks to Charles's feedback, I understood that being just good enough for rank wasn't the end all be all for mapping. With my complacent mindset, I was stuck at a wall, and I didn't enjoy mapping it nearly as much as I had before. Once I saw painfully honest feedback from an experienced mapper though, my perspective changed as I was able to learn what I really needed to progress more. Mapping became fun again because I stopped being complacent and got past the artificial skill ceiling. Nearly all mappers hate their own past maps, and I think that's a good thing. It's a sign that a mapper is improving, and improving is what can make map creation an engaging experience. If someone thinks their maps are the best right from the get-go, and adamantly refuses to change their perspective, they're bound to stagnate and lose interest, just like I had with Condo Reduction, and again with Reign of Fear. Hopefully anyone interested in mapping can learn from my mistakes and understand that there's more to mapping than just reaching ranked status. Anyway, thanks to these guys for supporting this video, and I'll see you next week.